Welcome back to She Can, where women role models lead by example by telling their stories, sharing their insights and experiences of how they got to where they are today to support and guide others. And it's easier to be what you can see. So I am excited to talk to Claire Hoffman today. Claire, welcome to She Can. You're a journalist and author, reporting for national magazines covering culture, religion, celebrity, business, and whatever else seems interesting to you. You have a master's in religion from U Chicago, a master's in journalism from Columbia, an MFA from NYU, and you're on the board of the Columbia Journalism School and ProPublica. Your first book was a memoir, Greetings from Utopia Park, Surviving a Transcendent Childhood, which was published in 2016 by HarperCollins. And now you wrote a new book, Sister Sinner, which is a historical biography of Aimee Semple McPherson, which is about the dramatic rise, disappearance, and near fall of America's most famous woman evangelist. It's a revelatory study on how power, religion, and fame intersect, which is very timely. And we're going to get into this later. Claire, do you want to tell us a little bit in your own words more about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Sure, thank you. And thank you for having me. It's an amazing introduction. Um, I work as a journalist and an author, and I think there was always some part of me that knew that I wanted to be a writer. My father was a writer, and it was something that, I felt like I was good at, which was kind of unusual. I felt like I wasn't good at very much, and that was where I got the positive feedback. But yeah, I grew up in rural Iowa in the 1980s in the Transcendental Meditation movement, and it was a real sort of moment in time where a lot of people had moved from all over the world to be a part of this community that was based on meditation and the teachings of our guru, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And that's pretty formative to who I am today. It really sparked my interest in religion and spirituality. It sparked an interest in sort of anthropology and community. It gave me a sense pretty soon after I hit puberty, probably, of being an outsider. I felt pretty quickly like I wasn't totally jiving with everything that was happening there. And so, I left, I went to school in California. I reconnected with my father, who had left our family when I was a kid. And I, started taking freelance jobs, writing articles for any place that would publish them. And I went to journalism school 20 years ago now. And then I went to divinity school. And from there, I got a job at the LA Times and worked there for a number of years and then became a freelance magazine writer. I was on staff at Rolling Stone for a long time, and I wrote these two books. That's my career.
Yes, I love it. Claire, so tell us a bit more about your first book, which is a memoir. And you've been touching on this. You grew up in this community in Iowa, which is obviously a really different sort of experience of growing up. Your mother had decided to become part of this community. And so there you went. So tell us a bit more about those experiences and how they informed you and made you who you are today, and about the process of writing this memoir.
Yeah, I mean, initially when I had thought about doing a book about this community, I wanted it to be like investigative journalism. And in order to sell it, I basically had to turn it into a memoir. So I wasn't like a natural memoirist, I would say. I was somebody who wanted to like get to the bottom of the truth, but had to sort of share my personal story along the way, which was something I initially was not comfortable with, but I got there. And yeah, I mean, it was a really intense place to grow up, I would say. Like the belief was very strong. So I went to the Maharishi School of the Age of Enlightenment, where the majority of our time was spent learning about Maharishi's philosophy on life. We meditated in school, and those meditations were graded. We ate according to an Ayurvedic diet. We learned how to diagnose our own doshas. I mean, everything was through Maharishi's system of knowledge. And the adults in the community were meditating 3 to 4 hours a day. So it was just a really
Mm,
intense moment in time. The TM movement isn't so much like that anymore. It kind of has evolved and changed. But it really gave me a sense of, I mean, initially of incredible cynicism and nihilism, I would say.
yeah.
And that has evolved. I have mellowed with age, I would say. So, at this point, I think back to what it's given me, and it has given me this perspective on religion and spirituality where I'm like not of the party, but very interested in the party, I would
Mm,
say. And I have a lot of respect for what religious experience can do for people and the way it can transform lives. So I'm not anti-religion in any way. I do still meditate, but I don't have any real spiritual practice beyond that. And I think it also gave me a sense of, I don't know if justice would be too strong of a word, but a desire for kind of truth to power, which, I mean, you mentioned me being associated with the ProPublica. I think it has given me an instinct for wanting to make sure that people have all the information about what's going on around them, because I think I grew up in a place where I felt disempowered, and I felt like my mother, I was raised by a single mother, where she felt disempowered. She
mm,
felt like somebody who was being used by the system.
mm.
And so that's something that has really stayed with me, I would say.
If I listen to you talk, Claire, I feel that, there is this often beautiful desire for this spiritual connection that can lead though to devastating consequences, right? Do you want to talk to that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean it's a complex idea in a lot of ways, but I think, I feel empathy, and I've had my own spiritual experiences, and I feel empathy for people who have. And in a way, like I have such respect. Like if you have a profound experience that defies logic or gives you a sense of the world and its meaning, or kind of a transcendent idea of what all this is, and your purpose, like, what else is there? That's a very high um, pull in the
Yeah.
world.
Mm,
And at the same time, I think I have seen in my own life, and of course, working on this book, the ways in which the people who are kind of middlemen, basically,
mm,
between you and your higher power,
mm,
and a lot of shenanigans can happen.
definitely.
And there's a lot that becomes complex and problematic, and even for those people, like I think
Yeah.
those people don't start out wanting to be bad messengers, so to
Mm,
speak. But I think having somebody who you empower to connect you to a higher power leads to problems because we're all human. And
yeah.
so that was something I think both of my books, I felt like a through line. I had a sense of the guru that I grew up with when I was a kid, like a sort of Wizard of Oz character, somebody who I was looking at from afar, who had all the power. And um, as I was working on that book, I had a sense more of him as a human being and his own private thoughts and ambitions just through research and interviews. And that kind of softened me and also made me think about like what it must be like to be a leader like that and the
Mm,
problems you encounter, which is what led me partially to take on Aimee Semple McPherson. Because part of it really was like, I was like, I wonder what this would be like for a woman. Because male religious leaders in a lot of ways they kind of have a playbook. Like
yeah.
there's
Yeah.
patterns where things go
Mm.
wrong. And so I was interested in that.
So tell us more about that. This second book you wrote, all about, I think they called her Sister Aimee, right? Tell us more
Yeah.
about her and about the book and the revelations really that you have sort of tried to spell out.
Yeah, I mean, I will just say initially, I have two daughters. They're now young teenagers, but at the time they were really into, there was, I don't know, this is like 10 years ago when all these books were coming out, like 50 bad girl, important girls in history. Like there was this kind of
Yeah,
flourishing moment of like girl power
power.
happening. Yeah.
Mm,
And, I bought all those books because I had two little girls. And and I took that they were, I had just had this feeling of like, a lot of there were exceptions, of course, but like many of these women, it was so kind of on the nose, like they had to be perfect in a lot of
mm,
ways. Like they were role models through and through. And at the same time, I took my kids to go see Hamilton, and they loved it. And they loved Alexander Hamilton, and like they sing all the songs. And I was thinking about it, like, it's funny. Alexander Hamilton, would like cheated on his wife and was blackmailed, and maybe ends up being in like at fault for having his son end up in a duel that kills him, like incredible tragedy. He was not a perfect person, but I saw how much my kids looked up to him.
mm,
He was like a folk hero after seeing that play. And I just thought like, oh, I wish that there were women like that where you were like,
mm,
oh, she was good and she was bad, and I had known about Aimee, and that was like part of my motivation for coming to her. And initially, when I had read about Aimee Semple McPherson, she had this giant scandal in 1926, and these two court hearings, these trials that ended up being the most expensive in Los Angeles's history until the Charles Manson trials in the
mm,
70s.
mm,
And the way in which they kind of captured the Los Angeles imagination is very much comparable to the O.J. Simpson trials, right? It was just something the whole city was wrapped up in and the nation. But initially, when I'd heard about it, I thought, like, oh, this is a powerful female religious leader who, as she said, was taken down by her enemies. She was too powerful, she was too loud, she was too female. And that I took that sort of at face value, and I started doing the research, and pretty quickly was like, oh, well, actually. She made some real weird decisions.
mm.
She
Yeah,
wasn't necessarily falsely accused. And at the same time, she was the victim of incredible misogyny and patriarchy. And so much of why she, had a target on her back was that she was a woman. I mean, it's very rare to have female religious leaders in the United States, and I think in the world, it's extremely unusual. And I mean, she was definitely the most powerful and most famous religious leader in the United States at that time. She was a household name. But she made some bad decisions, and I can understand those decisions in the context of her life, but they're pretty wild. Like the allegation is that she faked her own kidnapping. She
mm,
disappeared for 35 days. Everyone mourned her for drowned, and she walked into the desert 600 miles away with this kind of resurrection-like story. And
prophetic
yes,
story.
yes,
Yeah.
she was definitely somebody versed in biblical narrative, so she
Mm,
played with that. So it's not like something I relate to, I would say. I'm not like, oh, I get it. I also would make up a crazy biblical prophetic story. But I understand the kind of pressures that sent her there. She was a 35-year-old woman who had lost her first husband to typhoid and divorced from her second husband. And she was sort of in her prime, but living with her mother in a tiny two-bedroom apartment and incredibly famous and being treated basically like a saint. And so, like, sure, you can kind of imagine that at some point the answer to that is running away with a male employee. Sure.
yeah. Yeah.
I get
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the part of what the book is, the project of the book is to kind of complicate to tell the story about an incredibly ambitious woman. I mean, her ambition is incredible. It is
Mm,
breathtaking, you know, like
mm,
what she was able to do and accomplish. And she had this mother who was like a momager who really supported her and pushed her. And these two women together, like what they achieved in 1920s Los Angeles is incredible. I mean, it's just breathtaking. And at the same time, the self-sabotage and the cost of um, the pushback on her is also breathtaking. So
mm.
it's a wild story.
It's a wild story, and we want everyone to go out and buy this book and read
Yes,
it
I
because
have it.
it's,
Wait,
yes, Sister
yeah.
Sinner, there it is. So we want everyone to go out and buy the book. I mean, this was a modern prophet, right? And this is the beginning of the Pentecostal movement, isn't it? And you are deemed as a master storyteller, Claire, and you have amazing reviews. And so I'm wondering, can we draw some parallels to this day and age where we see other leaders who are sort of trying to be somewhat prophetic, and where this religion and fame intersects? And so I know you've written some articles about that. Let's talk about this for a second.
Yeah, I mean, the other piece of Amy's story, you know, even if you weren't interested in religion, it's also like a real case study of fame, you know? And so, yes, this, you can draw parallels to contemporary religious leaders. You can also draw parallels to celebrities and to just leaders in general. You know, this kind of complex relationship that happens between people who are elevated in some way and given
Mm,
sort of special powers and special attributes, and who sort of speak to you from on high, and the kind of dangers that happen in that relationship. I mean, this is what I was talking about with my first book. You know, I'm really interested in what happens when somebody like stands up on a stage and talks down and people have an idea of them as above you. You know, I think
mm,
there's a lot of complexity that happens and a lot of bad behavior. And so for Amy, I mean, what I saw was just this way in which she really became untethered, I think, from herself. You know,
mm,
I believe that she was a sincere um, religious believer. I think she was very convinced that it was her, you know, mission on earth to spread the gospel. She was a incredible pioneer of the Pentecostal movement, which now accounts as a quarter of the world's Christians, but at the
yeah,
time was very much a fringe religious movement. You know, I mean, it
yeah,
would certainly have been called a cult by many Christians at
mm,
that time.
mm,
Um, and, you know, she had all this ambition, but she was also, as people started to treat her differently, you know, I mean, there's these stories of her doing these divine healings where it's
mm,
like, you know, she spends 12 hours sweating and laying hands on people and, you know, not taking any breaks and almost being kind of carried off the stage, you know, kind of leaving it all there. And you start to see in her writing and in her life this shift about who she is and how she perceives herself in the world. And I think that's really interesting to think about as we think about leaders and religious leaders and celebrities, where there is this aspect of being watched all the time and being kind of objectified. I mean, at this point now, commodified. I mean, Amy
yeah,
was sort of a forerunner in using herself as a platform. You know, she used her
mm,
personality to be the product in many ways.
yeah,
And that's something we see everywhere and, you know, from large to small. And what that can kind of do to your ego or your sense of self or your soul and the disconnections that can happen. It feels like this real moment in time to me. You know, like at
yeah,
1926, somehow she
mm,
still thought that she could be in control in this way, that I think now
mm.
people have much more of a sense of what it is to be in the public eye, but this was like very early fame. And I think that's why I love it, you know?
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating. And she was able to get audiences of 15,000 people and more, right? So,
Yeah.
gosh, that
Yeah.
must, to study someone who might have started out as someone who really only wanted to do good, but what that
Yeah.
does to a person
Yeah.
without the knowledge we have now. And I think, but even now, 100 years later, this is still a conundrum that a lot of people who then end up in the public eye face. And I think the other thing that you work out is that she's been someone who was so ambitious, and she understood how she could use the emerging technology to her advantage. So she had her own radio station. And this is things that we see that in the Trump era, and with the sort of all the influences that he uses to spread this message, and the message of Project 2025, and the trad wives, and you name it. I mean, these are all things that we still see very much in this day and age, happening and working extremely well to a movement's advantage.
Yeah, I mean, she was really interesting in that she had this instinct that it just feels like that, like just instinct to just always be as close to the people as possible, to have no middlemen, you know? I mean, to kind of
Yeah.
go back to that, she wanted to be the connector. And it's a fabulous instinct for power and growth, frankly. And so, instead of writing for the local Pentecostal magazine, she started her own Pentecostal magazine. And she did a few visits to other radio stations and was like, I'm going to get a radio station, making her
Mm.
one of the first women to hold a radio license, one of the first Christian radio stations. So all these things like make her, as I said, like a pioneer.
Pioneer.
But it is, I mean, this is part of what the book deals with, is that, she initially was somebody who really preached this kind of romantic, empowered, loving gospel of Jesus, right? Like this
Mm.
really emphasizing kind of the softer side. And during her trial and this time when she was more like she had a lot more enemies, and she, was being criticized so much, she became almost, I wouldn't say paranoid because she probably had some reasons to be paranoid, but like very dark. It turned very dark, and it became, she was anti-Catholic, and she would make accusations of her enemies. She would reenact the crucifixion with her as Jesus, like it took this kind of darker, paranoid view. So anyone who criticized her was sort of painted with this dark brush, which of course feels very relevant today. This view of like, if you don't agree with my version of the truth, then you're evil.
Yeah.
And so for me, like one of the things I've thought a lot about in this current moment is to try and soften some of my anger and outrage, because I do think, and not like, to be clear, I think there's a lot of reasons to be outraged. And I'm more trying to like figure out how to live with my outrage. But I also think I see how outrage doesn't seem to work, and social media more than anything, like watching this evolution of technology in Aimee's time and now today with social media, it doesn't, like, people posting about things they're kind of hot takes and reposting political things or things they're upset about. It doesn't seem to work. Like,
No.
and so I think what does work, and what you see her presenting to people, and what you see something like Project 2025 being very successful with, is presenting not opposition, but your own individual vision, right? Does
Mm.
that make sense?
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, so it's not reactionary, it's individual vision. So it's not like, hey, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. It's like, here's my view of the world, and it's aspirational, and it's an invitation into that reality, I would say.
Yeah, and that's what the last election in America has been so successful with, and actually not just in America, because we see that everywhere
I know,
now. You know, we have
I
that in
know.
Germany, we have that in Holland. I mean, this far right movement has
Yeah,
gained so much speed because they use this technology so well, and they use people who personalize this collective vision and
yeah,
therefore make it authentic. And
yeah,
that is so appealing to other people, I think. And I don't think that the opposition or anyone who doesn't believe in the far right movement has found a way yet on
yeah,
how to stand against it, other than, again, with a personal narrative, right? I mean, I always think, I'm German, I was born in Germany, I've got grandparents who had to flee from all kinds of different countries and congregate in Germany, and the Americans came to save us, and that was literally the case in my family's sort of past. And I just think, when I think about the whole thing, I get goosebumps, and not in the good way, because
yeah,
all of it feels terrible and wrong and,
yeah.
you know, very scary. But I feel that we haven't yet found a way to, we haven't written an opposing document to
No,
2025. We haven't
no.
gotten people onto a platform that works where we know it works. And that, I think, is something that is very important. And so I think your work is very important in itself, but it's also important to think about all the things that are happening now with a view of how people used it in the past, such as Aimee.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think we all should be students of history right now because history repeats itself, and we have this sense of like, oh, it was so long ago, but it's not. And a lot of the issues that were happening then are happening now to kind of an eerie degree. And I agree about the bad goosebumps. I get them too. And I'm concerned. But I think, you know, looking back on where progressive politics have been successful, and I say that like I'm a progressive person, is this vision like, I mean, you think about an Obama or somebody like
Mm,
that who really captured people's imagination. I'm from rural Iowa where they voted for Obama twice and Trump
mm,
twice. And so
mm,
that to me, I'm like, what is it? What's going on there? Because those are such oppositional politics, but I think the shared overlap is this vision, right? Like they
yeah,
provided a vision. And I think,
yeah.
I mean, part of why Amy's story is so interesting is it's like the beginning of this time where people, I mean, she started the first mega church, and that's sort of like,
Mm,
oh, okay, fun fact, but that's also about mass experience,
yeah.
right? And our experience of ourselves as a mass and mass audiences and how to have giant collective experience and how to use technology to create a public, right? So she
Mm,
experienced the public eye in this very negative way, but she'd also created a public.
yeah.
And so, how do you have the public have these shared experiences that are positive,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not about fear or hatred, but about, a positive shared future. So I
Mm,
feel like that's where I hope things go, but I don't, I'm trying to figure it out along with everyone else.
yeah, absolutely. Claire, so what do you feel are your biggest learnings or your takeaways from all the work that you do, which is always around sort of, the intersection of power, religion, and fame?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I don't ever want to be famous. So I mean, I
Definitely.
tell my kids that I'm like, just never, never, ever. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of celebrities. I've seen a lot of meltdowns. Like,
Mm,
it does not seem like a positive experience. But that aside, I think it's about really as much as possible empathizing with other people's viewpoints and
mm,
understanding like everyone is for the vast majority of people are good people who want to, live in a world that is peaceful and equitable. It's true. Like it really
Yeah.
is, and belief is a very powerful thing. And I think that's like what I've seen in my work is just like you can exist in completely different realities based on your belief system. And so I think extending each other empathy and understanding that um, can help for sort of clearer connections.
And to agree to disagree, right? We don't always have to believe
Yeah.
the same things. If
Yeah.
we're sort of 50-50 or just over 50, that means we're
Yeah.
on the same page.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I'm really trying to move away from my own hot take instincts.
Um, Claire, what would you say are you most proud of to date?
Oh, well, I mean, I have two incredible daughters, and so, watching them grow up and have a sense of themselves in the world and what they can do and how they can help and who they can be. I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of their confidence, and their sense of purpose. Yeah.
Claire, and what really matters to you now, and how do you want to matter going forward?
Ooh, how do I want to matter going forward? I mean, I want to continue to be able to write and think and explore ideas that are interesting to me. In terms of mattering, I think I want to kind of, throw my quarter in the fountain, so to speak, of progress
Mm,
and, making sure that people have freedom of choice. That's really important to me.
yeah. Claire, so what are your plans and goals for this year and beyond?
Well, I've been working on a novel I know, while I was working on this book, it was sort of like a way to let off steam. This book has like 6,000 footnotes and it was like very research heavy. And so at the same time, I was working on a novel. So I really hope to finish that novel and get it out in the world. It would feel incredible for me.
Amazing. And can you give us a little tiny little sneak peek what that is about?
Yeah, it's it's like not my story, but kind of my story. It's about a female detective who goes undercover in a new age sex cult to try and get somebody out.
Incredible. Okay. Well, we can't wait to hear more about this. Claire, do you have any role models? Who are the people that you inspire you, that you look up to, or not look up to, but just feel energized by or motivated by?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is I have so many women in my life, quote unquote regular women, but who are professionals or activists, whether they're, I have a friend who's a reproductive rights lawyer. I have a friend who is an activist for um, caregivers. I have all these women in my life who are really passionate and just kind of keep pushing things
Yeah.
forward and caring about the world and in their own quiet ways, really trying to keep the structure of democracy in place, frankly. And so I really admire them, even as I write a new age thriller. I'm like, you guys keep doing that. I'll be over here writing this thing.
Yeah. Claire, so what takeaways would you like our listeners to have when they listen to your story?
Hmm. I mean, I think that I always want to advocate for people being thoughtful about religion in the world and looking at it with kind of fresh eyes, not with their own prejudices and histories or, cliches about what religion is and see the way that religion is actually lived in people's lives and to think about yeah, these ideas of about the public eye and about the power that we give to people in that separation of like a leader and a follower and what happens there. I think is endlessly interesting and just something to think about, and to be thoughtful about who you give power to and how you give power.
Yeah. Claire, I'm so thankful that you came on She Can to tell your story and share your insights, of which there are so many in your books that are so relevant to the times we live in. And I'm very grateful that we spoke a little bit about the difficult areas of that, but also the good areas of that, right? Because faith is a beautiful thing, and the meaning of faith in our current times is something that I really thought about as I was sort of trying to fast read your book, as I knew that I was going to interview you.
Not a short
So
book.
no, not a short book, and I have to read it properly, but I think there is a real, I sometimes think if I look at the world that our kids grow into, we need more kids to study theology and philosophy, because it gives you that insight into thinking, right? And the meaning of things and problem solving and critical thinking. And it has so many different, like history and so many different things that are in at the intersection of religion and philosophy. And so I always think we need a lot more of those people in the world. So I'm so excited to have you on She Can.
I'm so happy to have done it. Thank you so much for making this happen.